Cyberwolf says, subscribe now or be terminated.
Angelo Lopez writes and directs Wasteland Cop, a 2026 post-apocalyptic science fiction action movie akin to the likes of Turbo Kid and Commando Ninja in tone. So if you like those movies, this one will sit nicely alongside them. So Wasteland Cop is I guess a spiritual sequel to their previous movie Wasteland, although I don't think it's actually connected to it, but that was also a post-apocalyptic movie that we have reviewed on the channel, but Aaran from Screenstars actually reviewed that one for us, and you've got me for this one. Okay, so the story here focuses on a kind of post-apocalyptic landscape after some type of war, and there is still a kind of somewhat functioning police force. So the movie centres around our kind of Marshal character, our lead policeman, and it's a kind of a Mad Max style post-apocalyptic world with everyone kind of wearing that type of garb. And the Marshal comes across this artifact that seems to be, everyone wants it. There seems to be some value attached to it, but no one really knows what it actually is. It looks like some type of technology. And there's this kind of band of marauders led by this sort of masked guy who kind of wants to get it, and then maybe there'll be other people involved as well. So there's a series of skirmishes and things like that about who's kind of involved. There also is a degree of Blade Runner-esque kind of style influence here as well, where the movie focuses a lot on what they call replicants, which are basically kind of androids. So there's a big plot point involving these kind of replicants, these humanoid-looking robots. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. So if you like a fun, vintage-style, retro-themed action sci-fi, this is the one for you, I suspect. Very, very much like Turbo Kid. Maybe not quite as the budget of Turbo Kid, I would say, but it's a sort of similar movie, both in kind of style and actually kind of subject matter as well, because that one also had a kind of an android element to it as well. Let's talk about what works in a little bit more detail. So yes, this is kind of a Mad Max style post-apocalyptic movie, but it has this sort of retro feel to it. So it's almost made like it would have been made in like the 80s, similar to Turbo Kid, but maybe not quite as on the nose as that. You know, but it has this sort of, sometimes these kind of VHS video effects and things like this, and it's very much stylistically like you would have seen in the kind of the 80s produced kind of post-apocalyptic movies. It's not really trying to, you know, move the needle in kind of doing something new like a post-apocalyptic movie like The Road would be like, for example. This is very much in the style of the kind of the 80s. But it's not like Turbo Kid where it's taking place still in like 1994 like that movie was, for example. Anyway, so it has this kind of retro feel to it, which is really fun if you're a fan of the post-apocalyptic genre. And it just has this kind of like somewhat kind of camp, kind of kish kind of style to it. It's just this kind of fun vehicle with lots of kind of over-the-top characters, fantastic kind of costumings. I mean, they really go all out on the kind of the Road Warrior style aesthetic with all these kind of various different denizens that we'll kind of see up in this world and things like that, with some quite fabulous looking kind of armor and gear and things like that. There's some kind of quite fun weaponry. Our main bad guy has this kind of like chainsaw, like a sword basically with a kind of a chainsaw. We've seen kind of things like that in Sci-Fi before, but you know, it's pretty cool to see it in the movie certainly. And a kind of a bunch of other things. You know, lots of cool vehicles as well. Again, very much going with that kind of that Mad Max type of aesthetic. There's also a lot of kind of cyberpunk influences. It's primarily, I would say, a post-apocalyptic influence here, but secondary to that, I would say, is a cyberpunk. There's a Blade Runner-esque feel to it. There's a couple of times where we have scenes that involve, you know, in a bar or kind of a bit more of a built-up area, and it has more of a kind of a cyberpunk aesthetic. And there's certainly functioning technology in this world, unlike, say, Mad Max, where it's pretty much all dead. There's still kind of like neon signs and things like this. So it's a cross between a kind of a post-apocalyptic world and a kind of a cyberpunk world. But there's also influences from westerns, from anime, I would say, and even kind of crime noir as well. So it's a very kind of stylistic movie, and there's obviously kind of really sort of leaning into that kind of stylistic choices. I have to say I kind of quite liked our characters. Our main character of Marshal is played incredibly straight, and it almost, if you were to take this out and kind of put this in a more of a straight cop movie, the way he conducts himself, it's very much like a kind of an action movie cop archetype, really. So it's not like super far-fetched in regards to this character exactly. He very much seems like a kind of a cop that you would see from an action movie. The way he acts, the way he sort of talks to his fellow officers and things like this, how he tries to apprehend perps rather than just kind of blowing them away and things like this. So, you know, he's kind of played pretty straight, but in this kind of fantastical kind of world. And I also kind of quite liked some of his colleagues. They've all kind of got quite strong choices in regards to their kind of their style, their aesthetics and things like that, and I kind of quite like some of their characters. We never really spend too much time with anyone else, and even our bad guys as well, they also have some kind of great characters, and they're like even more over the top than our cops with this kind of very elaborate kind of costuming and makeup and things like this. The movie also very much like Turbo Kid and Commando Ninja leans into that kind of comic book gore. You'll see people getting kind of sawn in half. You'll see, you know, heads explode, blood splatter all over the place. But it is a comic book style of kind of gore. It's not to be taken like, oh, this is going to be, you know, this is going to make me feel like wincing and stuff like that. This is kind of like knowingly schlocky, silly kind of gore done in a sort of a comic book, unrealistic style, but stylistically so it kind of fits in with this kind of retro feel of the movie. There's some kind of fun action sequences, but this also has a little bit more of the kind of the sort of a bit more of a kind of CGI overlays where we see kind of, you know, sort of blimps in the sky and sort of these kind of like neon-esque sort of signs and things like that to give it more of a sort of cyberpunk film. There's also a little bit of kind of almost alien tech as well in the movie. We have some kind of quite fun action sequences and stuff like that that kind of that are peppered through the movie. They're never kind of like large scale or anything like that, but it's still kind of quite fun and a little bit of kind of racing around the desert. And I think the cinematography is actually pretty strong on this movie as well. So on a technical element, and it's clearly a low budget film. Apparently this movie was actually filmed over a number of years, which is quite a hard task. I mean, it's almost the opposite I see of some films today. Some low budget films, you know, they're filmed over a weekend. I happen to know this happens because I've been told by filmmakers. They're literally filmed over a weekend. This, on the other hand, I think I've read that it was 8 years that it took to make this film. I don't know if that was all filming necessarily, but certainly 8 years to get this kind of, you know, completed at the very least. So it's a real sort of like passion project and a real sort of like labour of love from the filmmakers here. Apparently the guy who is our Marshal kind of has like a mohawk, and he's basically kept that hairstyle throughout this entire filming schedule. So there's some real sort of dedication that's been made into making this movie. It's a lot of fun overall. What doesn't work? It's not quite as polished as the aforementioned Commando Ninja or Turbo Kid, and those movies weren't especially polished either, somewhat deliberately so, you might argue. This one does feel a little bit more rough around the edges. It's not quite as stylistically smart, I would say, as those two. So although it's a fun movie and I think it gets a lot right, it doesn't quite always stick the landing on kind of everything here. So I'll go into a little bit more detail. Why do I say that? I think the main thing for me is I think the pacing is just slightly off on this movie. Not terribly so, but just slightly off. There are times in this movie where I feel it's a little bit low energy. Now there are action sequences in it, but they're relatively short. Nothing kind of spectacular in regards to kind of scale, certainly, or kind of, but nothing spectacular in regards to kind of stunts and things like that. Again, this is a lower budget movie. We've got to kind of remember that. But the thing that isn't a problem. The thing that I think makes this movie's pacing just a little bit sluggish at times is the movie's plot is a series of going and talking to different people a lot of times. It's kind of Marshal going and doing his investigation, talking to one guy, getting some information, going talking to another guy, getting some information. So there's a lot of that. So the movie has this kind of like almost a procedural feel to it, which is a lot of police work, I guess you could argue. But it makes the movie have a little bit of a sluggish pace, coupled with some of the scenes I think could have been a little more trimmed, because I think a lot of this is good for character development, but I think the movie could have had a little bit of a faster pace had they trimmed some of these small, slowy, talky scenes down a little bit, just a few seconds here and there, just to make these kind of scenes flow a little bit more in a kind of a punchy manner, to give it a little bit more oomph, because it just kind of slows the movie down. And the other thing I think also adds to this, I don't think the music is particularly strong here. Now again, if we look at its contemporaries, Turbo Kid, Commando Ninja, although that's not really all a post-apocalyptic movie at least, they had some really kind of like great synth-heavy 80s style kind of music. This one doesn't really have that. There's a couple of times where it tries, but I think the music here, had they made some different musical choices and put a little bit more of a kind of a real funky synth-heavy retro style kind of music over this, coupled with kind of just trimming some of these kind of scenes down a little bit and improving the pacing, I think it would have just been a little bit more sort of kick-ass, if that makes sense. The budget also is a little bit more lacking at times as well. Again, none of these movies I've mentioned were high budget, but this one, again, it's a little bit kind of like, I think with a movie like Turbo Kid, I think that is a movie that can possibly convert someone into watching a B movie. It's not a mainstream film, but I think it's got enough crossover appeal to, if you were to show that to someone who only watches mainstream films, I think there's a good chance a lot of people would probably like Turbo Kid. This one, I think the kind of the lower budget aesthetic and some of the issues I've mentioned, I don't think quite would convert as many people. Maybe some, but maybe not as many. That's for sure. So you know, there's a few areas here where I feel it's not quite as strong. And again, I suspect this is probably down to budget more than anything else. Certainly not through lack of trying, because this movie, as I mentioned, I think it's really a testament to the passion of the people who were involved in this movie. So there's a few elements there that I think this makes this movie not quite as strong as Turbo Kid and Commando Ninja. That being said, I do think this is a strong movie. If you are a B-movie fan, if you like the 80s post-apocalyptic movies, I would strongly suggest checking this out. If I get a chance to buy this on Blu-ray, I will. I liked it that amount, basically, which is not, I don't buy any old screener that I get sent. So it's an enjoyable movie, certainly for fans of the B movies of the past. I would definitely kind of say that it's a real treat to behold. And I really love Turbo Kid, and this is almost like a kind of spiritual sequel in some ways, although it's nothing to do with that. So for me, I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. It's a strong film. It's well worth watching if you like those movies, or those type of movies that I've mentioned. Please go and check it out where you can. 7 out of 10. If you have seen it, what were your thoughts? Leave a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
To the Neon Knights.